Hi, this is Caneel Joyce. Welcome back to Aloud. Today on our podcast, we have a very special guest. Jess Kolko is deep in the trenches of an organization that I know many of you are currently relying on quite deeply. It's our beloved Whole Foods. And Jess works at Whole Foods Corporate in Austin, Texas, and in particular has been helping with a massive and extremely rapid transformation inside of the organization for them to be able to respond to the quickly changed needs of our society today. She's got a really interesting story to tell, and I think it will also illuminate why you showing up today to do this work and to be in this space of personal growth does pay off so very much, not only for you, but for all of those that you touch through your conscious leadership. Jess, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's such a treat. And just for background, Jess initially was a friend of mine, and friend that I met through a friend, hadn't seen her in years, and then we reconnected, and now she is a client, and she's a client that gives me a lot of energy every time I meet with her. She always inspires me, and so I'm really excited for you to see her. Also, I wanted to mention she's got some incredible ink, guys. She's full arm, beautiful color tats. So if you want to check out our live conversation on video, you can go on check it out on YouTube, and there will be a link to that at caneel.com/podcast. All right, so let's get into it. Jess, welcome. Let's just do a little check-in. Let's see kind of where you're at today and how you're coming into this call.
Today, I'm actually really excited to have had sort of as we're all saying, our new normal, a new normal week. It has been a whirlwind of working way more than 40 hours, working a lot outside of my normal hours, working over the weekends, really just being super focused on shifting the business. So I'm really happy to have a pretty sunny day here in Austin, and something that feels a little bit more doable than the kind of fire hose I've been drinking out of for the last probably month.
Yeah. You look really radiant and healthy. Guessing you've had some big runs lately. What's the latest? I know that Jess is a big distance runner. What's the latest big run you have done?
The latest big run I've done, I ran around Mount Rainier, and it's called the Wonderland Trail. Normally takes, I don't know, a week or so for people to backpack around it, but since I'm a runner, I did it in 3 days.
Jeez.
So that was probably my most epic thing, and hopefully training for Yosemite. I've never been out to Yosemite, and I'm supposed to do 100 miles in Yosemite this summer, but we'll see how that goes. But still getting out there and training for it because it keeps me sane.
Incredible. So that's a very long run. I know a little bit about the backstory of how you began running, and I think it actually connects to what we're going to be talking about today with the journey you've been on recently in your role at Whole Foods. I wonder if you could just share with our audience, why did you begin running, and what was it like before?
Yeah, so I used to be a chef for many, many years. I worked in kitchens, worked my way up through the ranks. As you know, started at like 14 years old as a dishwasher, and worked my way up through the ranks to become a sous chef. And in college, continued to work in kitchens and things like that. And then once I graduated, worked my way up the ranks a little bit to that sous chef position. And if any of you had worked in food service, you know that it's really difficult to take breaks. And the only way that we were taking breaks was our smoke breaks. So I used to be a pack-a-day smoker. I was working in restaurants all through college, all that stuff. So, it didn't, at one point I decided that smoking didn't fit with my lifestyle. I've been a vegan for a really long time, kind of come back and forth to being vegan. And I'm really interested in nutrition and health. And I was still a smoker. So that really serving it for me. My husband had asked me to quit about 15 times before then, but it's one of those things that only you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
And you can feel it for yourself. So what I started doing was I started running. Didn't worry about the smoking part yet. And started running one lap around the park, which was a mile.
Wait, I'm sorry. What's the connection though? Why did you start running? You're smoking. You decided you want to start running. Usually smokers
Yeah.
don't run.
Yeah, no, part of it was I knew I needed some help in quitting and wanted to really figure out what it was that was causing this, like, why did I have this habit and what did I want to do here with it. And I knew that, I needed some help. And I'm not really good at asking for help most of the time. I'm much better at it now. So I decided I would power through and just start with running, and then hopefully that could get me to a point where I could feel like, okay, I really want to continue to run. So the quitting smoking part is is a lot easier for me to do. So I started running, ran one lap around the park, which is a mile, slowly,
Mm.
and just started working my way up from there. So after I ran my first 5K, I decided it was okay to, kind of stop the smoking habit. So
Mm.
at restaurants, like I said, it's difficult to take breaks. So I talked to my chef and I said, hey, when everyone goes out for a cigarette, I'm going to go out for a green tea break. And she was very supportive of that. So that got me to understand how to do it in the restaurant world.
Mm.
And after that, I ran a 5K, I ran a 10K, and I said, hey, let's go run a marathon. Let's go try something out, something that scares me, something I've never done before. And then it just became part of who I am. I run all the time. And it's not even like, I don't even think about it anymore. It's just, I get up, I go run, and it's part of my meditation and my morning practice.
Mm. Incredible story. Well, I'm happy to hear that you're taking such good care of your health, and you certainly have needed that physical stamina and endurance over this last month. Let's rewind. Let's actually go into the walls of Whole Foods Corporate. And what exactly is your title at Whole Foods Corporate?
My title is Senior Team Leader of the Transformation and Nutrition Team on the culinary segment of our Global Support Office.
What does that mean? What do you do?
So food transformation basically is taking food and making it into something else. So anytime you walk into the the food bar area of the Whole Foods Market. So that's our prepared foods and bakery departments, where we have a salad bar, a hot bar, we have grab and go items. There's the, pizza menu, or the case that you can walk up and get, a pound of a salad or whatever you would like out of that case. My team is responsible for all of the recipes that go into those departments. We're responsible for the ingredient statements, the allergen statements, and the nutrition information there. So anytime you see calories on a sign, or you get something that has a label on the outside and it has a nutrition facts panel on it, my team is responsible for those things. And it's only the stuff that we make in-house. Not responsible for any of the stuff on the, packaged grocery side, but it's all of the in-house prepared foods items. So yeah, it's been a big shift in the business there, because, sorry.
You're right. I was on mute. Yeah, because nobody's actually in-house now. Nobody's even going into a Whole Foods, really. So
Yeah.
that's a total upending of your role. What was it like, if you can remember the moment when the news really began to settle in, and that first shock to the system came to your team? Do you remember that day?
Friday the 13th.
Yes, Friday the 13th.
It actually literally was on March 13th, on that Friday. We got inkling that there was going to be a big shift over the weekend in and we needed all hands on deck. So I have a team of 12 who help support all of this in the prepared food side. So just to give you a heads up, we have almost 70,000 recipes. Every store has unique items. So it's a big chunk of data that we need to wrangle. So Friday the 13th, there was some talk of a big shift coming, and then, it was get all hands on deck, get my team prepared to be working over the weekend.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your team at that moment. Or let me rephrase the question. Let me think for a second here. All right, great. So that's this moment. We're on Friday the 13th. Now let's rewind a little further. I'd love to know, because I know that this story really points to the coming to fruition of a lot of the work that you have done to grow as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Before we hear about how you responded to this crisis, I'd love to hear about what the challenges have been that you've noticed that you're facing, and maybe how you would have responded before. Like if this had happened a year ago, what would you have done?
If this had happened a year ago, I would have panicked. I would have not known what my first steps were going to be. I would have started spinning in victimhood, not understanding what needed to happen, what I needed to mobilize, who I needed to talk to. And I probably would also have been very scared that I was going to fail. And that would have been a huge disappointment to the company, because there's a lot riding on that transition.
When I heard you say, I would be really scared that I was going to fail, I noticed what I think I was reading as some emotion in your voice. And
absolutely.
What would it have meant to you personally if the team, in your words, failed?
That I failed them.
That you failed them. Mm-hmm. I see you tearing up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar sight. Beautiful and familiar sight. And I know that's sensitive. But what would it have meant to you deeply? Like, why does it matter to you enough to be emotional about whether you let them down or not?
I feel responsible for them and their growth and their success. As a leader, I feel like I need to be the one setting an example and practicing what I preach, and really being fully conscious of how my actions impact them emotionally, intellectually, career-wise. And at times in the past, I would not have been proud of the way I would have responded. I would have probably responded in a way that was not sensitive to their needs, and not in a way that I would have been an exemplary leader.
Which is very different from how you lead now, I know. But And I want us to get to that. I think it's just so important to underscore um, the the weight of that burden of leadership that I know so many of our listeners feel. And for those who perhaps haven't had an opportunity to yet be a manager or a leader of people, is something I think it's really important to just ask for empathy around like the tremendous responsibility that your leader most likely really does feel for how they are running their team. And we all struggle with that in our own ways. And I know that one of the cool things about leadership development work is through leading, it confronts us with some stuff about ourselves that goes beyond our professional leadership. And was this also kind of this relation, the way that you related to yourself of being afraid of letting others down? Was this something that showed up in yourself in your personal life as well at that time?
Yes, absolutely. For a long, long time, I struggled with perfectionism, and I think that a lot of the work that I have been doing for personal growth and professional growth has been around that, or something somehow tangentially related to that struggle with perfectionism, and you know, just being a human and being vulnerable, and it being okay to be vulnerable and acknowledge that vulnerability is a huge step for me in the right direction, instead of having to take on that perfectionism, that perfectionist role, and just be okay with, I'm human and sometimes I'm gonna mess up. And
Mm-hmm.
but owning that as well, right? There are leaders I know, um, in all places that I've worked, that mess up, then decide to, sweep it under the rug or cover it up, which always comes back to, haunt them later in life.
Mm-hmm.
But being okay with saying, yeah, I messed up. You know why? Because I'm human and we all do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it took me a really long time to be able to embrace that and to show that vulnerability, because like I said, I'm not good at asking for help, or wasn't good at asking for help, because I can do it all myself and I can do it all right. And
Stories. These are stories you had.
yep, absolutely, stories I had,
Mm-hmm.
and stories that had, since childhood, right? Like, these are just things that I thought were right. And realizing that, you know, creating that space for, even for my team members who I lead, to see that vulnerability, to know that it's okay to be human. I don't think that we always think that it's okay to be human in a
Mm-hmm.
setting when we're, being professionals.
Mm-hmm. What is that corporate story that gets so passed down, layer by layer, generation by generation, about why we shouldn't be vulnerable? Like, what what is that story?
I don't know. It's not a good story to be continually perpetuating. I think, though, that there's a generation of leaders that are, becoming a lot more emotionally intelligent and using that emotional intelligence in the workplace. There's a lot of people who, listen to Brene Brown, and who understand that it's everybody's experiencing this, and it's not just isolated to you in a particular situation with, a loved one or a family member, and that everybody experiences this. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so passed down that, as professionals, we can't be emotional creatures.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy, and I think bred a lot of folks, my parents' generation included, that, couldn't be emotional in the workplace, and that didn't, that translated to difficulty with emotions, even dealing with family. So I think the more that we can embrace the fact that we can't turn off our emotions during the workday, and name them and talk about them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and talk about how, an emotion can react differently for different people. And then I can tell myself a story, and you can tell yourself a story about the same situation. We were having the same emotion, but the story is different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's funny as you're talking about emotions and being vulnerable. I'm remembering our first session together, and we can definitely cut this if you want to. Do you remember what you said?
No, I don't.
I said, what do you want to work on together? Like, what would really make this a win for you?
Oh, being less emotional in the workplace.
Yeah. Not crying in meetings, I think is how you put it.
Honestly, I can't. It's who I am.
It's who you is. That's right. So, all right. So, at some point, you decided way before COVID-19 that you were going to do some work. And, you came to me I don't know why you would come to me for such a thing, but you did. You came to me to stop being so emotional at work. Beautiful. And then, but there is a reason. So, what was going on for you internally, what was going on at work that made you decide that it was time to seek out a coach? Because that's a big commitment.
Yeah, it is a big commitment. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I like all of my folks at Whole Foods. They're wonderful people, but I don't necessarily know that I'm getting the most out of all of the leaders around me. And I want to make sure that as a leader, I am being the best I possibly can be and contributing the most that I can in a way that um, can change the culture around me. At the same time, Whole Foods is really ingrained in our culture, and our culture is very warm and welcoming, and a lot about the individual, a lot about people taking their own initiative and becoming what it is they want to be in the store and in the corporate offices. I mean, most people who are in large visible leadership positions have come up through the store. So I know that that's a very important part of a lot of our leaders' lives. But I also think that it kind of narrows vision sometimes, because we get in a place of, this is how it's always been, this is how our leaders are. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting stuck there, because it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time when we're so ingrained in our internal culture. And one of the things that I wanted to get out of our coaching relationship was understanding, how things are in other places. And what can I bring from, the coaching world into Whole Foods leadership, that I think would really mesh well with the culture that we don't see today.
Great. Yeah. So, because there is a lot, like you said, a lot of people are becoming more interested in emotional intelligence and psychological safety. But what did you find? What were some of the new things that you brought in?
I think embracing the vulnerability. At times, I feel like my particular leaders, as an example, didn't necessarily show that vulnerability. And at times, to me, that was not being transparent. So, not for me, I'm not understanding the way they're reacting to things because they're not sharing that vulnerability. And I think a lot of times, had I understood what was going on and there was some of that vulnerability communication happening, I would have reacted differently to some of their reactions. So, as an example, if someone snapped at you when you're giving them something, like, here's this Excel file, and it wasn't the way that they wanted it. And, it's like, go fix this, or, whatever, some kind of workplace thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And but that reaction is coming from my kid is sick, or, this is going on at home, or not that I need to know all of those things, but something like, hey, I'm emotionally distracted because I'm having some personal stuff. And that's so, why I reacted that way, or something like that. So I think those are some examples of where that vulnerability and that connection
Mm-hmm.
did, made things more difficult than they needed to be.
Yeah. 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 Great. Just making a note here. Okay. So, we did some work together. We did work around the drama triangle and understanding the dynamics of drama, and um, helping you to better be able to locate yourself and ask that question of, where am I? Am I above the line? Am I below the line? Now let's fast forward, because I just also want to praise Jess, because she was an absolutely incredible coaching student, continues to be, is very, very dedicated, does her homework, and which I don't always give, but she wants, she asks for. So fast forward, we're back again at March 13th. And when you first got the news, can you put yourself back in your body at that time?
Yes.
What did it feel like?
My heart's definitely started beating faster. Got a little stomach clenchy, got a little sweat on the brow.
Mm-hmm.
What do thoughts started coming quickly on what needs to happen, who am I going to talk to, what we need to do, how many hours this is going to take, figuring out each of the next steps for the next few hours. And also, it's going into the weekend. What are we going to do? Our stores need help.
Mm-hmm.
My team members are going to need help over the weekend. One of the reasons why lots of us get into our corporate world is because we have that safety of those weekends. And what disruption am I going to cause to those folks when they're in a scary situation personally outside in the world? All of these things are going on, and I'm asking them to not be with their families that kind of initial big weekend of movement in the company.
Mm-hmm. 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 Do you remember if you were above or below the line initially?
I think initially I went below the line,
Mm-hmm.
but it was quick.
Mm-hmm.
Caught it pretty quickly and said, okay, I need to get this done, and I need to be in a state where I can be the best leader that I can in this situation. Because if I stay below the line, I'm not going to be that exemplary leader, and I'm going to fraction my team. I'm going to drive a wedge in some of the folks, and drive them away from me, perhaps permanently, if I don't be my genuine, authentic leader self. If I grab onto that emotion of being the victim or being below the line, that's not going to help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And even if that's the way I feel, personally, I feel that that's happening, and I feel below the line, my leadership needs to be above the line in this situation, no matter what.
Hmm.
There were times when I had to, drop off a phone call over that weekend and get myself together and be like, okay, coach myself out of the spin,
Mm-hmm.
and then get back on, say, sorry, needed to, take a minute or whatever, and get back on to my train tracks of being the leader that I want to be.
How do you coach yourself in moments like that?
Breathe.
Yeah.
Part of it. Take a deep breath, blowing roses. I did a lot
Mm.
of that, which is very helpful. So long, deep breath in and blow out. On a daisy,
Mm.
dandelion. That is super, super helpful in those situations. Just kind of, recenter, count to 10, do it again until, you get that emotion uh, in the right spot for what it is you need to move forward or do.
I love how you put that. So, because there is a need for our emotions. We're not trying to make the emotion go away. We're trying to work with the emotion. And in this case, I'm hearing there was fear. There
Yeah.
was some fear, intelligent fear, um, because and also quite a bit of empathy. So, how did you approach it? What what did you do to approach your team about this weekend, and how did you even message what the future was going to look like for them?
That was um, that was there were tentative steps, making sure that I didn't say too much too fast because I didn't know a lot yet either. Making sure that they had a clear understanding of what needed to happen and how we were going to be connected over the weekend. I have a couple of team members who I knew would be willing to step up, but I let everybody know this is going to be an all hands on deck situation. I'm going to need 2 people this weekend. It might expand to more people. So if you are not available, please make me aware that you are not available. And it's okay if you are not available, but if you can be, this is going to be an all hands on deck situation. I will be running, communication from our leadership to you guys on what needs to get done. And then all, data and specific questions need to go to these specific people. And this is how I always want to be looped in on the communication. And uh, this is the reality of where we are right now. And I will be in constant contact with you guys. I made a giant text message thread with all of my team members, just so I could be in contact with them. Only around very specific things did I discuss it on that giant thread, but in the other
Mm.
communication channels, I had very specific people working on very specific tasks.
Mm.
I'm sure I was breaking it down in a way that made sense, and then verbally getting a confirmation. Does that make sense? Yes, that
Mm.
makes sense. Or no, that does not make sense. Can you please explain X? There was also a lot of committed action, which is another, we're working on some leadership coaching as well as in internally as a group. And one of the big things that we're working on is committed action. So who does what by when?
Yeah.
I was making sure that every communication to my individual team members, I always got, okay, so what is your committed action? What can you commit to by end of day today, by noon? What, that committed action was very necessary in this time of crisis. And if I was asking for a deadline that couldn't be met, I made it very clear you need to renegotiate that deadline with me. I'm okay with renegotiating the deadline, but I need to run that renegotiated deadline to my leadership and make sure that that was an acceptable renegotiation.
If you hadn't been operating this way, which is in certain ways it's a tight ship of communication. It's no ambiguity, no open loops. Like I love this committed action. I think of that as just making really clear agreements. But if you hadn't have done all those things, what would have happened?
It would have been a mess. I wouldn't have known what was going on. I wouldn't have known if we could commit. I wouldn't have known if we could commit to certain deadlines that I was being asked to respond to. I wouldn't know what had been done. And that would have caused me to spin and become frantic and have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. And I can dig in certain places now, but I'm as a leader moved away from the day to day work of what my team members do. I definitely have been in the trenches with them, but I don't do it anymore. And that's one of the things that's difficult as a leader to embrace, is that as a leader, you need to be a leader. You don't necessarily need to be the one in the trenches doing the work, but you have to be okay with that. And that as a middle manager is a very hard spot to be in, because as a former perfectionist, I want to be in there. I want to be in the trenches doing the work, but I need to take that work and, you know, do 10,000 feet or do 20,000 feet or 30,000 feet, depending
Mm-hmm.
on my audience. And if I'm in there requesting, PLUs and creating ingredient statements, I can't get out of that and have that view for my leadership and have that communication to them make sense.
Right, right. How did your team respond? Was this a different leadership style for you?
I think they have seen changes in my leadership over the years. There's many of them who have been with me for 5 years, which is pretty cool. Definitely have some new team members. I have been in communication with them about the fact that I'm being coached,
Mm-hmm.
about the fact that I am doing a leadership class at Whole Foods, and saying a lot of the time, "Hey guys, I'm going to try this thing out with you. I'm going to suck at it right now, and I'm going to stumble, and um, my feedback might be bad, and I apologize." Practicing, and my commitment is to become the best leader that I can be and become the best manager that I can be. So I need to practice on you guys, and I'll try and let you know if I am. And a lot of the times they're like, okay, fine, no problem. And other times they're like, yeah, that feedback, like, can you just try again? Like, yes.
I love that.
So they're aware that like things are changing and shifting. But in all honesty, yeah, I mean, if I ask, there's one particular team member I feel who's been with me as a leader forever. I think she would say, if this was Jess 5 years ago, would she have reacted differently? And she would definitely say, yeah,
Yeah,
different leadership style for me for sure.
yeah. I love how you gave yourself permission to experiment and play with the new things that you were learning, especially because these are human to human relational skills so much of the time. So often it comes into our communication style. It comes into a model we might be trying out, or even new language. This is a thing that so often happens when we start learning about conscious leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a little bit like a record scratch if you begin to suddenly, as someone's trusted leader and manager, speak in a completely different tongue and behave a different way, especially if it's still feeling awkward and not natural. I love that. I think that's a great recommendation for leaders who are learning everywhere. Is it's okay that you're learning something. It's actually such a good example to set. And I love how you enrolled them in giving you feedback on how well it was working, rather than needing to wait for a quarterly review or something like that. We are allowed to try new things.
Yeah, and I think again that speaks to, showing your vulnerability too, and that being an okay space to explore as a team, because they all matter to me, and I want to know their feedback on all of this new stuff. If it's not working for them, then I need to take a look at, does that work for me?
Mm-hmm.
We all need to get on board, or do we say, okay, that model of leadership, whatever it was or whatever it is, doesn't work for my team, or doesn't work right now for my team, maybe later. Had I explained the drama triangle to them 3 years ago, I don't think they would have been receptive to that. But there would have been defense. There would have been like, why are you telling me that I'm a victim? um,
Mm-hmm.
Having done it rather recently, I think they're starting to embrace it, and that might not have been the case a while ago. Now are you in victim mode?
Oh, it's amazing.
Asking each other those questions. So yeah, that's a
Oh, that's great. That's so
yeah.
good. So, yeah, were there any moments that were particularly challenging over this last month in your team? Any challenges you guys faced together?
Yeah. I think for me, there was a lot of being very careful about how I treated everybody and making sure that everyone was okay. And there were times when I was not okay, but I
Can you
knew.
recall like one time in particular? Hmm.
Yeah, let me think about it. Yeah, I'll try not to cry while talking about it. So I have three peers, and we all report to the same manager. And we all had twice a day check ins every day for the last 4 weeks, just to make sure that, morning we know what we're working on, end of the day, we, recap. Um, I can't remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago on Friday. I, I couldn't I couldn't hold it together. I had literally worked 14 days in a row. I worked many hours on those days, and um, someone made a comment, and I just lost it.
Mm. What was it about that comment?
Having worked so hard over that last 14 days, and to have a comment that to me felt like I don't trust you, um, that felt that
Mm.
cut. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
But also to have one of my colleagues who was on that call, of course it's a video call these days, um,
Mm.
on that call, after we hung up, to text me and say, I see you and I'm here.
Hmm.
That was big for me. That was huge.
Yeah, that's so simple. I see you and I'm here.
Yep.
It's like all you need.
And it takes a second, right? I mean, to be able to just shoot that off to somebody in a text, no matter how distracted you are, you can say those things and be there when you need them to, which is amazing.
You can say those things, and people will say those things to you when you've created a context where it's okay for people to see your vulnerability. But if you've created a set of norms that I don't want you to see my vulnerability, so I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. And it's really important to me that you also pretend my vulnerability doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And if that had been the way you were operating, I don't think you would have received that supportive text message.
No, I don't think so either.
We it's a way that we so often like enroll people in us keeping up with our shadow dance and us keeping up with our self-deception and our lack of self-awareness. We enroll people in us keeping away from our self-awareness, you know? And
Yeah.
it's one of the first things you scan for when you start at a new company is what are the things I'm supposed to ignore here? What are we supposed to not
Yes.
talk about here or with this person? And so, yeah, I give you credit for the way that you've influenced your team, and that's where I'd like to go next because I remember because of the intensity of the crisis moment that your team was in. we moved our coaching sessions, which normally are live on video, we moved them onto like asynchronous on Voxer. And for those listeners who haven't tried it yet, you can download on iOS, you can download this app. It's called Voxer Walkie Talkie. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's one of my favorites. I love using it with my clients and my colleagues. And it basically lets you leave these extraordinarily long voice messages for each other. You can leave a message up to 15 minutes. And then you can also listen to it, up to 4 times its normal speed. So it helps you really if you were trying to navigate through a big message. But it's a great tool because it gives you a sense that you're in a real conversation, but yet for schedule pinched people that, most executives are, and I certainly am, we don't need to schedule it. You still need to find the time, it's still time, but it's flexible. So we'd shifted into this Voxer coaching method. I think, was I the first person you ever used Voxer with?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I'd been on it, but I've never used it before.
Mm-hmm. So it may have felt a little strange, getting started. I think it often does. But there was one message you left me, and I had asked how your team was doing. And you described to me what you were seeing happen in your team. And I was like bouncing down the street with joy, listening to you in what you were seeing in your team and how much you're appreciating them. And tell us about what you saw come forward in this crisis.
Yeah, it was an incredible cohesion of the team that I could not have predicted how amazing and rewarding it was to be able to see them come together and just tackle a massive amount of work with appreciation for one another, with appreciation for me as their leader, with no complaints, with many, many, many hours of overtime, with, many hours over the weekends. I saw people step up into leadership like they never have before. And I saw others on the team recognize that leadership and drive forward with that ship captain and make it happen. I was floored by how incredible it was to watch. And, for Caneel to come back on Voxer and say like, whoa, this is amazing. I'm like, it's them. She's like, no, it's
you. Yeah, it's both of you. But it is, you helped create that for sure. I'm sure they would say the same thing. How do you think your leadership is going to be different, when we're out of what feels like a crisis and we're through a lot of these big changes? How are you going to be different?
I think I'm definitely going to be different in just more of an acknowledgement to each individual team member about how they must be feeling, and not necessarily around every personal emotion. I had someone who was having internet difficulty yesterday, and she's very apologetic for what she didn't get done that day and what she had committed to get done, and all I said in my email response to her was, I can see how having internet issues at this time must be very frustrating. Why don't you just stop for the day, go outside, take a walk, figure it out tomorrow, and just acknowledging that. And then her response back to me was just joyous. And just that tiny little bit of interaction where I recognize your frustration and it's real.
You're allowed to be frustrated.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Go outside and be done for today, and then that's okay. And I think that I'm going to take more time in really just making sure that I continue that connection with people going forward. Also, my tolerance for bad behavior from other people is really low now. And I'm okay with being the one to call them out on it. And I'm also okay being If someone calls me out on my bad behavior, to recognize it, acknowledge it, apologize for it, and move forward from that. Whereas before, I might have gotten defensive or felt like that perfectionist was coming out again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 3 times today, I apologized for things that came off wrong, or, were over text interpreted, intention
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, which you can't really do, but people do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I ever would have done that as to the extent that I did it today. I mean, obviously, if I do something that really offends somebody, of course I'm going to apologize. But
Mm-hmm.
to just be in that space of, I'm a human, you're a human, we screw up, we try our best. I assume positive intent doesn't always come across that way, but let's continue to be humans and be real with each other.
Mm-hmm. I I'm going back to the way that you began running and just thinking about, there was no crisis. There was no leadership crisis in particular, when we started working together a year ago. And yet you, for whatever set of reasons, committed to changing, committed to growing. And then along comes COVID-19. And it's like it was again like that choice of, if I'm going to keep at it, if I'm going to keep this growth trajectory up, this is that moment where I really need to decide, am I going to give up like my biggest addictions, my perfectionism, my like heroing behavior? I can do it all. I'll do that for you. My beating myself up, my defensiveness,
Mm-hmm.
and my dwelling. Like I'm hearing you like I kicked I kicked some of those.
Yeah, and it feels amazing.
This is the glow. Yeah. Jess, do you have any advice for people out there right now who are managing it and maybe who haven't, for whom this concept of leading consciously is a new one, who are in the thick and probably, really below the line, working on a team that's really below the line, in the middle of a massive global crisis? What advice would you give a manager like that?
I would, like I said, embrace the phrase assume positive intent and connect on a human level. I think we all too often dismiss that human connection and make it about the work product, but you can't create the work product that you want without understanding the human connection. But it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be just as simple as, how are you doing? And when they come back with, well, X, Y, and Z isn't done yet, and blah, 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 it's like, how are you doing?
Mm.
Are you okay? Okay. You're okay, or you're not okay. How can I support you?
Mm-hmm.
And that has been, every single one-on-one that I've had in the last, month has been, how can I support you? All of this is so different right now. I don't know where we're going, but I know that I can be here to support you. So how can I support you this week? What can I support you as a leader? And I think going there is really easy to grasp. You don't have to cry in a meeting to show your vulnerability, but showing your humanness, how can I help you, is huge. And I think that goes a really long way with a lot of people. A lot of your direct reports, I think, will feel seen
Yeah.
when you ask that question. And it's not a hard question to ask. And normally the responses are things that you can actually do, which is also feels really good when you can support. One of the examples was, hey, can we move this, our one-on-one check-in? Because I really like to take my dog for a walk after I finish XYZ task. Cool, let's move it. Figure it out. That's simple, right? Or my internet is broken and I'm having a really hard day. Quit for the day. If you feel like getting on later, you can. If not, don't worry about it. And just being okay with some of those negotiations around
Mm-hmm.
court.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I hear you. You're at Whole Foods, and I hear you just acknowledging the wholeness of each of us as humans at this time. And in particular, I'm personally really grateful of how much you are holding your own wholeness as important here. Thank you so much for being here with us today on the show, Jess. If people want to follow you somewhere, is there a place they can do that? Are you active online?
Not a whole No, not a whole lot. I would definitely feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm there.
Great.
That works for me.
We'll put a link to Jess's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And really appreciate your time. And thank you, listeners. Thank you again for showing up today for yourself, for all of those who are impacted by your state of presence and consciousness, and by your leadership in its own unique and authentic way that you and only you can do it beautifully and perfectly. All right. Enjoy being humans this week, and we'll see you soon. Again, check us out, show notes at caneel.com/podcast. Bye.